Thanks. Thank you everybody for coming. I'm impressed most of you have made it at the back end of nowhere to meet for this session, so thank you very much. A little bit about me behind me, so if you want to ask me questions around other areas afterwards, I've covered quite a lot of stuff in my history. I was the Microsoft Solutions Specialist for the productivity stack for 7 years up until a couple of years ago for New Zealand. So there's a whole range of other things that I do outside of business solutions based around SharePoint and the Office infrastructure. Thank you. So, have a seat. So just to cover off a little bit, we are not covering in this session Azure Search Services. So if you're a developer and you were thinking that's what we're doing, sorry, there's still the door open if you want to make a quick exit. I won't hold it against you. And I'm not going to be covering hybrid Delve. But if you get hybrid search right, you're 90% of the way to getting hybrid Delve in place anyway. So it's just one of those things that you need to keep an eye on. Quick poll of the room. Who here deals with infrastructure and SharePoint? Who here's a development? Okay, who here's a business consultant dealing with information requirements and information management? Good, because that's an ideal mix for the audience for this. Because hybrid search is all about business. You don't go into hybrid search thinking this is going to just be an IT infrastructure project, because it's not. So hybrid search is around your users, their content, and more importantly, their location. Okay. So the key towards getting it right is preparation. And now, while I will be doing a little bit that goes into some of the architectural guidance around plumbing between on-premises, the cloud, and 365, and I make the distinction because I'm referring to some of the Azure services in the middle when I say the cloud, not just Office 365. Preparation is the key towards getting that right. And if you think that this is going to be the halfway house towards getting you towards cloud services, boy, are you mistaken. So just a quick poll around the room. How many people here are doing hybrid search as the first part of a program of migrating to cloud services? Who's here because the business have said we need to be able to find our information wherever it is? Fantastic. So you're all prepared for what is going to be quite a tough journey. So how many people have already got cloud services running, Office 365 running? No. Good. Azure services? Okay. How many of you have deployed and know what's happening on your SharePoint environment on premises? Okay. So my assumption here is if you're in this room, that you're going to have at least a basic understanding around both the business requirements and the kind of technology services and skills that you want. The deck is available and this is being streamed, so if you want to save that to the end, that's all good. So from a business point of view, there's the user experience is actually going to drive what you're doing, and then the context of doing that, and I'll expand that in a bit. On the technology side, that's actually really easy. You need people that are very smart and that are capable and that understand plumbing and infrastructure and identity and networks and those sorts of things. But once that's set up, that stuff just sort of works. So what drives it? Well, really, context and your user experience. Who was involved or who's been involved in what is referred to as enterprise search requirements in a business? Okay, so for those people that put your hand up, what was enterprise search in your business? Somebody want to comment?
A failure.
A failure, okay. When I've been involved in a number of enterprise search deployments, it's typically we want to be able to find stuff in any repository we've got. I want to be able to see it in one place, and I want to know it's the right thing. And people invariably go, great, we can index that and present you a view, so that shows you everything. Do you know it's the right thing? No. Have they bothered cleaning up the information beforehand? No. Does anybody take ownership of it afterwards so that the information stays fresh and therefore the index is correct and the information you presented is right? No. So getting this right is actually your biggest part of this project is not about putting in the hybrid infrastructure, although I'm going to cover that in a moment. So I like to actually make sure that people understand why we're doing this. And while this is a quote from Jeff Fried, it is something I hear echoed a lot when I'm speaking to GMs and CEs, because when I'm talking to them about what they're doing with these services, it's not a technology engagement, it's a business engagement. And typically they're going, I don't care what it is, I want to know how I can find it, I want it to be surfaced, I don't really care where I am. It's just got to be able to get to it quickly and easily. So just to put an example out there, and this is actually a live example with one of my clients who's multinational. They have people that will be sat out in Singapore, contractors on sites, who want to be able to remotely see all information, not just this information on 365. They have information in country which should never be allowed out to a cloud service because of security requirements around that. I'm not going to go into the details for that. And they have people that work out of Australia. Now those guys typically just sitting inside a cloud environment. They're dealing with contractors, third parties and coordination. Most of their information always sits there. Sometimes they need to get access to internal business information, whether or not it's to do with things like HR and whether or not it's procedures or if it's templates around their solutions that they sell. And then there's the guys that sit in Wellington, in HQ. They typically deal with just the information that's local, that's just managed on premises, although they do need to access information that goes between the two. For all of these people, their search experience needs to be more or less the same. The context and what's visible to them needs to change. So if I'm dealing with those user experiences, when we talk about hybrid search, we're actually talking about 3 different sorts of options that Microsoft provides for in its technology stack. So there's this concept of outbound search. And that is, the information internally is accessible from an outbound point of view. Security trimmed, presented in the right manner, in the right context. Inbound search, so people coming in can find and discover the right information, and people that want to be able to see secure information that's not externally available and general information which should be available to everybody. Now, these also correspond to how you can go around architecting the search solution and the deployment thereof. The biggest impact for getting these right, though, is actually around architecting your identity and your network services correctly. This is not actually about the search content yet. This is about who you are and where you're coming from, so that we can present the information in the right way and trim it and secure it, etc. So, from an IT point of view, yes, we want to be able to support people from access from anywhere, and we want to give them a consistent user experience regardless and unify the results. But really what we're concerned with is if we're going with a hybrid solution, I want to be able to avoid upgrades. Cloud services, particularly with Office 365, that stuff should happen for me. I want to minimize my infrastructure requirements and infrastructure management around it. And you know what? I really don't want to be planning for an infinitely scalable set of storage that's going to be around managing my index. Now, who's done 2013, SharePoint 2013 on-premises search deployment? Cool. Who's done that where you've needed multiple indices? Awesome. That's really good. So planning for that kind of architecture independently of whatever else you do actually requires quite a lot of effort up front. But once you've done it, you can actually template that. It's fairly standard. The biggest thing about moving to online is that a lot of that effort goes away. So while you still plan for a search architecture with SharePoint, a lot of the capacity management, a lot of the infrastructural services are now offloaded. So it's simple, or it should be. I've got my farm, I've got my sites and my content, I've got my search center locally. And in the cloud, I've got my sites and my search center, and the search goes out. If it's on premises, it comes back, does a bit of jiggery-pokery with the reverse proxy, I get my results. All good. It's easy, isn't it? Just a few things we need to bother about with networking. And if you believe that, you're as naive as I am. So we start looking at those things, and actually what we're dealing with is a lot of networking services to start with. And just a quick poll, who went to the 2016 upgrade planning infrastructure session yesterday? Okay, I'm hoping Chan did because he was delivering it. But for those people that were there, I'm not going into some of the level of detail that Chan covers off, but I will touch on some of the same points. But you're looking at introducing a level of complexity to what you manage that you haven't had previously. Because whereas with cloud services, we can kind of go, a lot of the infrastructure and upgrade and patching and that sort of stuff has gone away. Awesome. And on premises, I still have to manage that. I've now gone, now I need something that provides a bridge in between the two as well, and I have to manage my on-premises, I need to manage this hybrid environment in the middle, and I need to be able to manage the control through 365. So when I said it's not the easy option, it really isn't. Your level of operational management, your level of control and skills needs to take a significant uplift. So the skill set that we're looking at is around identity, security, some networking, your SharePoint infrastructure planning. Who here is an in-house person that deals with SharePoint infrastructure? Not from a development point of view, but actually infrastructure management. Awesome, 2 people in the room. That is really good odds for New Zealand. Information management design, hybrid design, which we'll come to in a moment, and then user experience design. Now, I said right up front, the biggest thing here is it's about the people, your content and location. Well, once we've done the plumbing and we've put the middle piece in and indexing happens, magic happens, corpus starts to get crawled and our service, and we start to be able to get to results, well, then what? A large proportion of today is actually going to be covering off some of those areas. And information management in the middle in black, because that's the bit that will make this live after we've done the IT project to join those 2 things up. So just to give you some examples, we've all kind of seen classic SharePoint search. It's a bit fuzzy on my screen, but hopefully it's a bit easier for you to see. Our normal blue links, bit of text, and then we've seen stuff that looks at results from other sources. We have all seen stuff that looks at results from other sources presented in a blocked manner, haven't we? Yes? No? Yep, good. And the idea being that as we start to go, I'm crawling stuff from either on the internet, and with 2013, the introduction of federated search services, being able to bridge and get those results from, say, Google, Bing, wherever else. And then when they introduced the service pack and backported some of the hybrid features, being able to go to 365 meant that we could start to block those things out and say results from here when they're available. The nice thing about doing a federated approach for hybrid search, and it does come under the banner of hybrid search, is that if we don't have the results back from the external service, we don't worry about that. We can still present the results from on-premises. So if we suffer a service outage for some reason outside of our control, we're still getting partial result sets back. So from a user experience point of view, if I'm on premises looking at my local stuff, like that Wellington example, or if I'm able to get in from the internal services remotely through a VPN or some other form of access, at least I'm getting something. Whereas if I look at from an outside point of view, I want to be able to take that experience, but instead of blocking it up, when we start to go, now this is hybrid, it's from a single index. I've plumbed in my internal services, my internal search, it's crawled, it's available externally. I get an integrated result set, so not blocked because I've not defined that. The default is we start to get something that's just integrated. And the only way we can tell the difference is very specifically just to look at the name. And that just switched between showing you an example as if this is coming from an on-premises search result. Now, if all we're doing is integrating the index for the hybrid environment, when I go to my search results, which have to be presented from Office 365, regardless, I get classic blue link and text, but the path tells me it's from somewhere else. I actually need to inject a different piece of infrastructure in order to get the thumbnails as the same way that this presents if it was online. So now we actually have a disparity between hybrid search if I've just indexed and I'm presenting my on-premises results to my online experience, because where it's indexed from an online environment in 365, I get my thumbnail previews. PDFs, Word Online gives me a thumbnail preview. Same with presentations, Visio, the whole lot. So why would I put in a search experience that gives me that? There's some thinking that needs to go in around managing it. Whereas what I might want to do is actually present something that goes in the same way that blocking works. I actually want to present it in a slightly different experience to actually pull through the fact that some of these things are from somewhere else, even though it's from one search index. So this is a presentation tier consideration. This is not about where it's indexed, where the corpus is, and how it's set up. The reason being that I actually want to be able to present those in a consistent manner. I might want to start to be able to do something a bit more interesting than this. Because let's face it, search is search from a technical point of view. I can see a reference to an item if I'm allowed to see it. I can present certain types of information if we've got those indexed. So what are the practical considerations? A lot of it is about user-based design. So from a prerequisites point of view, I put up there early on that we would be looking at networking and security and identity and infrastructure. Actually, there's a lot more to it. I'm assuming that most people in here, at least if they had to do their on-premises setup, were working alongside their networking infrastructure guys. Yeah? Really important for doing hybrid. When your architecture considerations, because we're talking about the identity management between on-premises and cloud, we're talking about being able to not only present that information that's crawled, but that consistent experience. If I want the thumbnails, I need to start looking at what we do with things like reverse proxies and Office Online Server. So for those that have done 2013, how many of those did that farm deployment with an Office web application server? 3, 4, okay. In order to do your hybrid search architecture, and then you'll build Office Online Server, which is the new name for the new version of Office Web Application Server, is a prerequisite. And it needs to be in the same area on the same farm, externally facing, as your cloud search service application. So if you look at on the flip side of that, we then start to go, well, actually, there's just as much on the business side we need to deal with around supporting this as there is on the technical side. And I'm not going to go into all of those, but it's worth looking at the first block, and in particular this concept of search verticals. So who's done any research around the 2016 platform? Been to any of the sessions on the 2016 platform, apart from Chan's? Okay. So Microsoft's been touting the whole approach to search for surfacing information for a while. The concept of a search vertical is a key one for the hybrid search architecture, because a single long scrolling list of information is really not good enough. If I'm in a business, I already know that it's going to be in the context of my business. If I'm coming in as an end user, as a business user, and I go, actually, all I want to do is just to find out what the current policy is on expenses. I'm going to Ignite. I need to know what I can and can't do. I'll just search for it. Well, if I search for it, I already know the context. You know who I am. If I put in expenses, I expect to be targeted. I don't expect to get a big long list. So this idea of a search vertical is how we start to target and group information by segmenting the corpus results that are presented. And that actually becomes quite an interesting part of your architectural design, because we take a look at what it means to be based on different areas, whether it's office, mobile, externally, remotely accessed, what it means to be an FTE versus a contractor versus service provider. And then we have a look at the content based on the kind and the area and the business structure. And I put up a couple of kind of back office examples, but then you extrapolate that forward. So from an information management point of view, that's actually really important, because search is search is search. Well, no, it shouldn't be. And then we look at what it means for the repositories, whether it's coming out of structured systems, email systems, file shares, SharePoint environment, websites, even people information based out of your identity. If we start to expand this and go, I want to put in the infrastructure for a hybrid environment to include Office 365, the plan has to be that I'm looking at taking on things like Delve later. I'm taking on OneDrive later. I'm taking on those apps and the other services available. Otherwise, why am I doing it? If I'm not planning on consuming those services and using them, I wouldn't be doing hybrid to start with. Hybrid search is a targeted way of getting in the prerequisites to do hybrid services from a SharePoint and 365 point of view, regardless. You're kind of 90% there by the time you've done the initial architecture and the implementation. So the idea is that I can take that lot and I do my on-premises search architecture. So a quick poll. Who's done anything other than present the generic search screen with a few filters? Anything that looks or feels different? Okay. Because beyond here, when I look at what it means on premises, I want to be able to marry that with the search experience from 365. Because once the hybrid search architecture goes in, all requests, all queries and result sets come from the 365 environment. Which basically means if your network service disappears from your search on premises, you lose your ability to access your search full stop. Because the presentation tier is from Office 365. If you're in a pure hybrid, we'll talk about variations for that in a minute. And then I want to be able to layer on those other experiences, whether it's an on-premises one side by side with those. So when I start to look at things, yes, we do the normal search planning. And if you've done a proper enterprise search deployment, you know you've got to go through all the normal sort of audit and management and controls of what's my sources, the types of information, the formats, how I'm delivering it, etc. And I want to be able to go, well, okay, so, and here's a real example. In this example, it's actually showing transpowers. We want to be able to group those things in a basic manner. I'll present those information. If I look at that, I can go, well, I might just want to show that by source and be able to filter that information such that it just changes those things. And the way that we present it looks remarkably like that snapshot I showed earlier for blocking for online. Because in essence, the end user experience at this point is no different. So you've had a big IT project to go, I need to do identity management to Azure AD, and I need to do networking infrastructure and proxy services and farm extensions and all these other things to present somebody something that looks almost the same. Whereas, let's go back. If I have a look at what we can start to do when we've brought our information out, we can actually start to go down this road of search verticals. This is targeting. This is actually making use of the information we've crawled so that I can present this online or on premises. And yes, it is deliberately saying cloud computing for those that picked it up. The idea is that we can start to go, yes, I can present you a vanilla set of information, but I can group that and target it. If I'm in the consulting arm of what I do, I can click that and actually changes the preset filter of information and presents it from on-premises and online. It presents it from all my sources, whether it's from email, whether it's being presented and it hires me off to delve afterwards, it doesn't matter. That gives me context. And then I've got the ability to be able to sponsor key things or trending items. So in here, I've actually split that out, where it says latest resources by high use topics. There's a set of prefixed ones we know everybody always wants to look for. If I'm looking for the policies and procedures, publicly available information, we're probably going to have that on 365. If I'm dealing with an organization that's got nationally sensitive information that is not going offshore, I want to be able to hit the button and see the filtered search results for all things that go, this is around national infrastructure. I don't actually want to see that go somewhere else. I don't want a separate search experience. So in terms of what we're doing, those design experiences and the constraints of our information tell us whether or not we're looking at hybrid, federated, or potentially both. And to do a true search experience now, a lot of customers will have to go hybrid if they run SharePoint. If they've got any aspirations for 365 and cloud services, hybrid is just not an exception. You've got to do it. Now, when you do it, that's going to be a choice of yours, but for those people that have information that goes, we're never going to have that offshore, or it's not appropriate for external parties to see that, but we want to be able to see it internally, you may extend what you're doing to include a federated approach. Just a quick poll. People understand what federated means across the room? Okay, for those that were shaking their heads. Federated is, I have my information indexed over here on my premises, and I've got a separate set of services and information over there. These may be managed by Google, Bing, third-party X, Office 365, that runs its own index, and that's over here. And when I issue a query from on-premises, it goes, here's my query, here's my results, I'll send you that token. Can you tell me if you've got any results? And you send them back. And the results come back from separate service, and then they're trimmed through what I do locally. Federation is actually really basic, so in terms of security trimming, it's just down as to, I'm a trustworthy party, send it back. If we want to get into proper security trimming of external results coming back, then we're into a bit more sophistication. The external one has to then support Active Directory-based security management, not just there. But federated search can just be, send it out, have it come back. Hybrid is, that's one index. It's one index, it's one set of credentials being managed, it's one set of security ACLs over the top. When I present the request, yes, I go from my on-premises, I type it in on the screen, the request is serviced and fully managed from over on the cloud. The index is over here, and it sends back all the results, and then goes, based on who you are, I'm only going to show you these 5, or these 10, or these 15. It's one infrastructure. Now, one of the things that, and this is just to show you how these things change, when I wrote this and updated it in September, there was still an issue that with 365, you could index up to 1 million items for every terabyte of storage that you owned on the service. At the end of September, they changed that, which completely changed to my architecture diagrams on one of my slides. So it's kind of, the service moves, and as Microsoft moves that service, what you need to be aware of from your solution design point of view will probably change as well. When federated search first came out, and it was backported to 2013, we were using the AD Sync. We were pushing out information, and it was more of that outbound search type design we were building for. With the connector and the two-way sync around credentials and management, we now do both ways. So those things are changing as we go. So your search architecture and design needs to have those sorts of considerations. And what that means is that while I'm going through my view here, as I click through on the left-hand side and I go through different search sets, in a basic search point of view, that just changes what's presented to me based on where it's coming from. At this point, it could be federated, it could be hybrid, it could only be on premises. It doesn't really matter from an end user's point of view. They just go, I want things from the vault versus I want everything. The everything one is the only bit where this will become evident that it's from somewhere else. Whereas if I look at this kind of experience and I start targeting it, actually, I can do lots and lots of different sorts of things. So when I start thinking search architecture and I go, what am I indexing, what am I crawling? The properties coming from that information need to be mapped and translated. Because then I can start to pull out the key metadata, the types, target that information. I can use things like the areas that that's from and say it's come from strategy. If that's known as part of my information architecture. If it's not, then I'm trending back towards the blue links. Now, quick poll of the room, probably more for the developers, or if they've been involved in that side of it. Who's actually played around with result sets, queries, and display templates? Good, because most of what you're seeing on there is a combination of the above. It's just result sets and display templates. The key is the mapping of the metadata behind the scenes in the crawled results. Because when I hit 1, what I want that to do is to change the context. So I start to do something a little bit more different. Essentially, it could just be one big flat set of results, but that's not really useful. Now, who knows today some of the constraints around, actually that's probably the wrong way of putting it. Today, one of the biggest constraints around doing a mapping from a hybrid architecture is actually mapping your metadata properties and your crawl properties. For those that are running or have implemented SharePoint farms, are using managed metadata? Using mapped properties for search? Yep, okay. One of the biggest things is that actually when you go out to a cloud service on Office 365 right now, you don't have the ability to say, these are our standard ones, go and provision those over there. You have to recreate it. You can do mapping at a tenant level, not at a site collection level, which kind of cripples some of your solutions right now. Particularly if you make extensive use of a SharePoint environment and you're using search to span multiple business solutions like projects and team areas, external collaboration sites, etc., or DMS. If you're using any of those sorts of things where you scope your solution and you map separate metadata properties and separate content types, that kind of doesn't translate discreetly today. That's about to change as well. So this whole piece where we start to say, well, actually, you need to consider that at a tenant level. What do we want at the top to provide our search results? Because our search only now comes from 365 once we've integrated and done hybrid. Actually, you can start to go, well, we want to be able to target that a bit more as well. You're going to be able to. I'll skip over this one just because it's not really relevant right now. So if I start to unpack things, then I go, actually, if I'm doing my search on the cloud, I just go to the local index. If I'm going to go from on-premises, I need to introduce this concept of a cloud search service application, which is actually an extension of the farm, if you're not so risk averse, or a separate farm if you are, whereby the crawling and the information gets pushed out to 365 for ingestion. So that's, my document gets picked up here, gets catalogued in terms of what's going over, goes out to 365 where it is crunched and indexed. Which means if you're crawling your file shares and you have terabytes worth of information, guess what's happening to your network link during the period of crawl? So the combined index is held out externally, and you can actually, they've introduced a single switch, a toggle, which goes, is external content onto that. So you can say yes or no, and then we can start to flag those things externally. Which means when I send a search query locally, I get my results back locally. If I send a search query from on-premises, that travels out over Azure, my identity is validated, comes back to give me my results on premises, even if I want to know where the information is in area 1, as opposed to where it is over on area 3. So from that point of view, it doesn't matter what I'm doing. Once I've done hybrid, my information's out in the cloud. So from a build point of view, we've kind of added in an extra piece of infrastructure, and we've got to have consideration of what it means over our network services. Even though we're not worried about capacity in terms of index on local servers anymore, we are worried about network capacity and what it means out on cloud services. So this is just a sop to those people that were at Chan's session. Again, do we go for the infrastructure at this point? Do we start talking about sizes and proportions? And the answer is this is the wrong place to start if that's what you think, because we've still missed an important piece out. And this is just a blatant plug for Chan. I'm going to be watching your session later anyway. The idea is that what you still need to do is consider a logical services model. So before we start getting into now we need to design the server infrastructure to go in the middle, who actually thinks about doing a logical services model? When you built your 2013 or your SharePoint farms for on-premises, did you do a logical services model? Quick poll. Anybody? Did you plan for the services you were going to use? Did you understand about the use of the secure token services? Did you do Kerberos? Did you do mapping? Yeah? So you kind of did parts of it. This is actually really important. And you know what? I'm not going into a huge amount of detail here, but this is just the kind of mapping that you need to be planning and understanding, because secure tokens, your certificates and your identity become critical in terms of how that maps onto your services. And then how that translates into whether or not you are going halfway. And the answer is no. You're all the way in the cloud. And you're all the way on premises. So if I unpack what happens with the crawling piece a little bit further, from our farm, we're hitting SharePoint. We're hitting file shares. We're potentially using BCS and connector services to crawl other repositories. So who's using third-party EDRMs? Yep. Okay. Who's using crawling some custom database application, CRM, something like that? Yep. Okay, good. So the key thing here is connectors, particularly where you branch into then use of iFilters for cracking information, still work. As long as the security and the controls around it map onto an Active Directory security model. If they don't, forget it. Not going to work in a hybrid search environment anytime soon. So if you're indexing third-party EDRMs, you need to be sure that their connector, in terms of crawling it today from your SharePoint environment, is going to be AD security aware and compliant so that you can carry on those results into a hybrid environment. Or it needs to be rewritten, the connector. The identity piece here is then gets forwarded through the AD, and we start to look at the fact we do need an Office Online server. And that, rather than just being a nice bit for on-premises to give me previews on the local farm, actually sits in this, what I'm calling a bridge, which is that intermediary piece between the on-premises and the external. So from an infrastructure point of view, you need to make sure you've got your identity right. You need to set up your directory synchronization, connect, use your AD. The networking needs to be scoped for capacity because you will be crawling and sending a lot of information over it. So that when you actually go through, the crawler picks up information, skims out the key credentials. We're going to have just check those against AD before it goes out, and then that information is ingested and sent through to 365. Queuing, parsing, and processing, and then the mapping for your controls happens out on 365, which is great from a farm architecture point of view. If you've done a SharePoint enterprise search solution before, the scope of what you should have been doing, even on a small farm, would have been between 4 to 6 servers for just an enterprise search deployment. If it wasn't, you've got a whole heap of risk around your service. What this means is that while 2016 takes a step up with the inclusion of mini roles and the split out of things like the cache, distributed cache, if we did a purist model at a server architecture level, we'd be up to a minimum of 8 servers at the same spec as the 2013 4 servers to do the same job. by going hybrid and doing the cloud SSA in the middle, we can actually avoid having a number of those servers present, because all those services around the management of that are out in 365. So yes, they've been nice and reduced the number of services we need and servers we need locally. Not so great in that the actual requirement in terms of resources has gone up quite significantly if we're using 2016 at this space. So what that means is that when I now do the search locally, the query goes up through the index, it does the mapping against AD, checks my credentials, come back and give me a result. So if I'm out in the cloud, it's going, no, should I send you these results? Yeah, okay. From on-premises, again, that comes back through the cloud SSA for accessing this information, goes out, it does the mapping as well through the Azure AD, and then sends me the results back. Now, if we take that down another step, and we include the Office Online Server, the nice thing is at least the Office Online Server is just an app server, and we don't have to go all the way into big farm architecture like with SharePoint. But it does have to sit in the same zone and in the same set of services as your cloud SSA. And you're going to need to have proper certs on the environment. Self-signed certs won't cut it. SharePoint, Office 365 just goes, nah. So planning from that point of view means that you need to have that in your consideration as well. So from a, you have to just excuse me on here because we're using a slightly different view. Planning from that point of view, and when you pull down the slides, it actually expands this in a bit of detail, is looking at the farm to include the Office 365 server. I have included a bit of information around the kind of specification. It is more or less the same as the web front-end specification for a 2016 server, except it can't coexist with just about anything else. So in terms of setting it up, you do have to set it up on its own instance. Ideally, you should run it load balance just because, well, from a redundancy and a failure point of view, you will lose all your thumbnails and your previews if one of them disappears. So having it balanced and having it scaled out is going to be one of those things you want to consider. From a server point of view, the cloud SSA is basically, with 2016, deploying the search mini role in terms of what's deployed. You still set up all of the databases as though you were going to do a full SharePoint farm implementation for search, and then it ignores a number of those databases. So we can't say, oh, well, we'll just drop out those because they're handled on 365, because SharePoint 2016 doesn't like it when you do that. So you still have to set up the environment with those roles as though it's actually going to be running the processing, the links, the analytics, and everything on premises, but those databases and those services don't get hit. And what that means is that we then get that experience where we can go out securely, we can hit a proxy. I've started putting the representation here for Azure. You could technically move that entire bridge into an Azure environment, but I've done a number of these on premises. I haven't done one where it's purely held in Azure today and just reversing back to look at across premises. So until I've actually gone down there, I'm kind of a little bit reticent to go move that whole bridge piece out. But that's just my nervousness. So the idea is that when we go through, that identity and the service and the other checks goes through the Azure services through to the cloud SSA and then does your processing. So it's just kind of going down an extra level. I'm not going to go through this in the detail, but I've just put on some basic steps here. The one thing I would say is Microsoft has been really good with the 2016 hybrid deployment model and the updates, and have given you step-by-step, screen-by-screen type of configuration options for what to do for each of those models, whether it's just outbound, whether it's access anywhere for a full hybrid. They provide a number of documents around that. I've put a slide at the back which has the full list of links to the resources I would suggest you start from, which includes the details behind these steps. If you're interested in doing it, I suggest you look at that, and there is a SharePoint Search 2016 PDF called hybrid cloud deployments, which gives you literally blow by blow, decision by decision, the things you need to do to achieve those outcomes we're talking about. So there's no point in me putting them up here or going through that detail, because all I'm going to do is point you at that. It has been very clear. Now, Microsoft's even gone a step further in that when you set up those farms and when you set up the connections, they've even provided you the baseline scripts for going, here's how I talk to that service. Just put in the link for your service, put in your security token key, put in your... So they provided you pretty much all the scripts, both for the build, for the connection to the Azure service, for the connection through to 365. So all of that base level consideration is done. Which is why when I say when you look at the architecture, you need to be considering your information design and the other services, because at a plumbing level, what you need is somebody that's skilled around the networking, the identity, and the proxying, because all the rest of it above that line is going to be pretty straightforward. So from an on-premises point of view, and this is my only SOPTA configuration, the screenshots in terms of what we see and how you look at that, the configuration is identical whether or not you're looking at doing the hybrid configuration on Office 365 or for the on-premises. And with the SharePoint 2013 environments, with the Service Pack 1 and the CU from September last year, that brings it to the same level where you need to be to do that configuration. And I'm just going to jump forward to this just to kind of step through. From that admin point of view, it's actually quite straightforward. The configuration is literally just going through to the admin. Oh, this was something I found last month as well. Microsoft made a really nice little change when they updated all the services at the end of September, which meant that when I went to set up a new demo environment for providing a design for people, that I found that the search configuration screen and the options were no longer visible. And I went into the hybrid picker, because they're looking at doing Delve as well, and I went, awesome, they haven't put the shortcut here either. What I found was I had to go back to our old environment, grab the URL off the top for the search admin interface on 365, go back to my new tenant, paste the end of that URL onto the new tenant alignment, and voila, there was all my search administration interface. So Microsoft's making some changes on that side of things where you just go, sometimes it's just not as easy as it should be. Not because they've not set it up or made it easy to configure, it's just they keep frigging around with the interface and it moves. So there's a number of things there. The key being that to do the hybrid integration, it is as simple as going through the result sources once all the networking services and everything are set up. And you're just typing in the reference to a remote SharePoint environment. This is identical if you do this on the online service as it is to doing this on the cloud SSA. Excuse the typos in here. Now, the main thing here is that you are designing for single sign-on. So that whole identity management, what we do, secure store information, that is where, oh, no point leaving the video running at this point, I'll just switch it off. That is where you need to put in your planning and your effort. Now, one last bit. What happens when we can't move everything out? So I talked a bit earlier about potentially federating, not just doing hybrid. If there's information that can never be allowed overseas, or if somebody's coming in from overseas, they should never have access to it, or outside the corporate realm, then what we're talking about is going, well, we need to do both. So I want to be able to say all my publicly accessible information, by publicly I mean corporately authenticated user, needs to be indexed and synchronized, and therefore I want to be able to provide a single experience for that. I want to be able to go out and have that classic kind of, here's my information, I can see the links, I know what's going on point of view. Whereas from a federated point of view, if I see restricted content and I'm on premises or in a secure access to my environment, I want to be able to see the search results here. This is where we'll end up with a federated type experience, where when I hit the on-premises, I've then got an option to be able to click and surface additional results separately. Right. Okay. So just a quick back on the services. Now I mentioned earlier on some of the key constraints, but it's just worth reiterating, and I've left this one in here specifically because I know a lot of people do use the SharePoint environment for both covering file share, document management solutions, as well as classic kind of SharePoint infrastructure. If we're looking at custom security trimming, and it's particularly the case if you're indexing things like CRM or structured systems, then you're going to have to wait and plan for that as part of a roadmap, because you cannot do the security custom trimming using the default environment and the standard security management that is provided. So architecturally, it will not be any different if there's an AD mapping from its, how does it manage and reconcile its security and its credentials. But if you're doing something outside of that, then you need to plan for that as part of your roadmap. And the other piece of that is around the tenant to schema mapping. Now, Microsoft's about to release some new hybrid services next month, next week in fact. Two of those would probably be of interest here. The one that is definitely of interest if you're talking about hybrid search is the taxonomy services. Now that goes into preview for the feature pack next month alongside hybrid audit services. And what that essentially means is you'll be running those from the cloud and it will push them to on-premises. It doesn't mean I'm running it on-premises and we'll just propagate elsewhere. So in the same way that your hybrid search means I'm running search from the cloud and I'm accessing it from on-premises, you'll be doing the same thing with the taxonomy services. The nice thing here is that Microsoft is going that extra mile in terms of what they're doing. They are going to be providing the guidance and the assistance, the standard scripts and the import pieces that they have done for the 2016 Cloud SSA setup and the integration for 365. So it means that a lot of my headache, once I get past the conceptual stage, goes away. The summary being that, you know what, you're going to put the most planning and investment you do to do hybrid search, even though it's going to be a standalone solution initially. So you're not doing it lightly or because it seems like a good idea or because it's an easy step into doing cloud. And the other key point is you can do both federated search and hybrid search and make it look and feel like it's one experience. And that can actually be quite important, particularly if you've got systems that you today cannot synchronize out, such as those with custom connections, or those where there's information that shouldn't be moving out anyway, such as nationally important secret content, etc. Anyway, all right, so that's me. We've got about 5 minutes, so I've gone a bit longer than I anticipated in terms of just talking. Any questions at this point? Yes?
In this searching, we apply to OneDrive Business as well. Sometimes you need to be able to search for documents in OneDrive,
Yeah.
bring it into one location like within SharePoint itself.
Yeah, okay. So the question was about, can we integrate the search results from the OneDrive for Business into this experience as well? And so the answer is yes. It uses a separate mode for doing integration because OneDrive for Business has a hybrid mode as well, and you go through the hybrid picker to actually set up that set of services. But at the same tier, it's all the same identity, same networking, same services. And because it's being crawled from 365, the index is in 365, you just need to say that the OneDrive area is actually part of the corpus that's being crawled and shown. So there's work that goes into that higher level about result sources and about queries and about how you present it, but absolutely the OneDrive for Business content can be indexed and surfaced in the same way. Yeah. Any other questions? Come on, I can't have bored you all that much.
So in real world, what's the query processing performance like using hybrid or on-prem going to getting the result source?
So most of the query processing is actually handled in the cloud, so it really doesn't matter. It comes down to the latency of your ping from the service. On premises, in terms of the performance, I have on the 2 instances that we've done in the last 9 months, I have yet to see it go above the minimum level of crawling and processing on the front ends in the Cloud SSA. And by minimum level, I meant when we put it in initially, the initial crawlers had to be beefed up when we crawled across all the content, because we were talking 15 million items being crawled. A couple of days to get through that. The actual amount of services that we were running, we ended up dropping back down to the minimum specification in terms of the RAM and CPU. So we were running a couple of quad-core 16 gig front ends. So processing time, we never hit much above about 40% utilization for services. What it does mean, though, is because you're doing a lot of the processing and it's going out, if you're crawling a lot of services internally, you do need to have RAM-heavy servers with 2016. So the amount of service consumption used with the mini role when it sets up for the search, what Microsoft called the search appliance setup, is actually more memory intensive than previously. So that means you're going for 24 to 32 gig on those front ends. But once it's crawled and you've gone through your initial corpus crawl and your index build, then anything subsequent to that is really incrementals. So the amount of processing and the amount of resource management then actually just drops right down. So it's just planning for that. Most of what you will do, and most of that heavy lifting, will be done completely in isolation from anything that's ever seen by an end user. Because all you'll be doing from a experience from a switchover point of view is just redirecting where your search center is. So that's the actual transition from build to production. And it's just a URL change. So that's easy. Yep, anything else? So for those of you that have got people asleep next to them, wake them up, tell them we're finished. Thank you for bearing with me. I know we're at the back end of the whole conference center, so I appreciate you walking the extra distance to get here. I will be around outside afterwards anyway, so if you want to ask detailed questions, please do. And in a reversal of what normally happens, I'll be rating you as an audience, you won't be rating me as a speaker. So, no, in all fairness, just put down what you need to. Any feedback in terms of those things, please feel free to come up and tell me. I know I'm not the most emotive of speakers, so any kind of feedback's always appreciated. All right, thank you.